Last week, I went on this big rant about how I had cracked the code on my life and I had solved all of these major issues I had been dealing with for like a decade. And I felt really, really great about everything. Felt like I was on fire. I was just killing it. And actually, I still feel that same way. I feel great. I feel, I don't know, like I've solved a lot of these giant issues I've been struggling with for a long time. And so we talked a lot, or I talked a lot last week about, I don't know, all the answers I had, but I think it may have fallen a little flat because we probably did not talk enough about what problems I was actually solving, or I don't know, what everyone can actually relate to. So we thought it'd be a good idea to sort of flip the episode to where Michael will bring up a bunch of issues he's having or that I also relate to, that I think pretty much everyone can relate to. And we'll kind of start at a problem and then sort of work our way towards possible solutions or just different ideas on how we might solve these things.
Yeah. It's like a nice personalized little therapy session slash problem solving for me, which is great. So this is a this is gonna be a little tough to get into because there's a lot of different things that could any one of these could be a big conversation, I'm sure. Last week you described how well, here's one thing in particular. You described how previously you would work on a piece of art, personal art, whatever it is, and it would be an intense experience and you'd walk away. You described it as being heavy, or I think,
Mm-hmm.
or just something that I assume it draining, or kind of leaves a leaves a mark on you a little bit. You got to go recover. And how in this past several weeks where things have just really been clicking, that wasn't the case, where you were doing art all day and felt really good and were ready to go do it the next day. I mean, is that the right characterization?
Yeah. So, well, just real quick. Previously, let's say I would do a drawing in my sketchbook to kind of practice something or learn something. I would draw maybe one or two, figures or something, and then I'd think, okay, I need to take a break. I feel exhausted. This is
Right.
frustrating. I need a break, whatever. Now I am filling up the entire page, like every little nook and cranny. Like I'm going, like every, I don't know. I'm loving it so much that
Yeah.
I keep on going. One of my art friends, I was looking, or he was showing me his sketchbooks, and he says he just has this thing where he has to fill in every little space on the page. And I remember seeing that before and thinking, oh my God, he must love art way more than I do, or must be more dedicated than I am. But
Right.
now I think I get it. Now I want to fill up the page. So that's kind of where I'm at. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a beautiful thing to think about for me. And I've certainly been there for at times, but for the most part, that is not what happens with me. So I've been working on my personal project, the big thing I'm trying to develop for a long time now. This app slash service, and so I every morning I wake up, I do my stuff, I go, find a coffee shop, I start working on this, and I really enjoy it. I'm not hating it at all, but every day I'll sit down, I start work, and there's always this few minutes of just kind of having a hard time getting my brain going. I'm having to push through a little bit of just, ugh, what was I doing? Right. And we've talked about that a lot and ways of making that easier. So that's fine. But I'll get through that. I'll get into kind of what I would consider sort of the Goldilocks zone of after 20 or 30 minutes, I just feel a lot of momentum. I'm thinking really clearly. I'm solving problems, and I can feel myself, my area of attention, I guess you could call it, it starts to shrink. Where at first I'm there, I'm kind of paying a lot of attention to who's around me. Like, oh, there's this person, that person. Oh, there's this guy I don't like. He always pounds on the table and stuff. Like, I'm just very aware of the environment. But as time goes on, I just start to get really focused where I kind of lose track of what's going on around me and I don't know what people are saying anymore. And I'm just focused on the thing. And there's this really nice, little stretch of time where that it feels great. In the zone is probably what you would call it. But then typically I'll continue and I'll start to get hyper focused where maybe something isn't quite right and I get a little stuck on it and I just start to really fixate on this thing and I have a hard time stepping back and seeing the bigger picture. So I get into this sort of hyper focus mode. And this is pretty typical. The session's usually an hour and a half to 2 hours. And I'm getting there. And by the end of it, most days, I unplug and stop and I'm just like, I feel kind of fried. Not tired, not like, oh man, I went for a run and I'm, that exhausted me, but I feel good and I exerted myself. It's more like I feel a little bit angry or there's some frustration there. And it doesn't even mean the work was necessarily bad. Maybe I did really great, but I feel really wound up. So it kind of makes me think about what you're describing, where you can go all day and do something and feel really good with it. I don't feel like that's the case for me for most things, and that includes what I'm talking about here. Even if I sit down to play StarCraft, for a gaming session, it's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be me learning and whatever, but usually by the end of 4 or 5 games, same thing. I'm like, I feel fried. Like I can't function anymore. I'm kind of like there's a little bit of anger or frustration or whatever. So there's probably a lot of things that go into that, and we can try to sort through some of it, but that's where I'm at, and that's a major thing that I would like to try and improve.
Okay. Let's get the obvious one out of the way. Are you taking breaks? Are
So
you doing the Pomodoro thing? I mean,
yeah. So when I do the work in the morning, I pretty much always will use a Pomodoro timer, 25 minutes and then a 5-minute break. I usually I mean, in the past, I would kind of take breaks by opening a browser tab and doing that kind of stuff, or, goofing around on Discord or something. Now, even if there's a little bit of that, I've been trying to force myself to kind of close the laptop and just like not engage with the computer. And I do think that is helpful, but it feels like my mind kind of just stays on the thing I was doing. It's really hard to actually be
right.
taking a break. Really, I'm just thinking about it for 5 minutes and then I'm back to it. So,
Okay.
yes and no.
So this comes up in art all the time. And I believe it applies to everything, but it's so clear in art because it's literally a visual representation
Right.
of this phenomenon where your brain just kind of zooms in and zooms in. So I've always had this issue of I'll do this at work a lot. I'm working, I have the whole thing in mind, like the whole picture, the whole composition, the overall idea in mind. And then I keep zooming in. This is why I kind of hate working in Photoshop and digitally, because I zoom in and then I start working, and then my brain's only handling
Mhm.
this little square, and then I zoom in even more and I keep doing these details and details. And there's something different about doing little details that exhausts me much more than this overall idea, this overall picture. And so I end up the same way. And once I get to that point, it's like I've gone way too far down this detail road.
Mhm.
It it's so difficult or impossible to get out of it without just kind of stopping for the day or taking hours off,
Yeah.
spending 4 or 5 hours doing something else. It's so hard for me to recover from that. So that it hasn't really happened to me in the last month and a half. And I think it's because, and this was a huge, and I'm sure will still be a huge issue, but recently it just hasn't been. I have struggled with this, not just with Photoshop stuff, but also with traditional drawing. When I started the life drawing class, my main issue, I kept screwing up the proportions. Not that I have them perfect now, but I would majorly screw them up. And the reason is that, you start the drawing, and then if you zoom in with your brain too quickly, you start worrying about all these little details. So you'll mentally zoom in and you'll get everything on the arm just perfect. And then they call time and you back up and the arm's perfect, but it's, 10 times too small or too big or whatever. And then it's just it exhausts you in a way that seeing the whole picture doesn't. And so what you have to learn when you're doing life drawing classes is you have to, it naturally trains you to step back and see the whole picture, because you don't have time to work on little details. You only have time to do that at the very end. So you have to see, you constantly have to be mentally zooming out and seeing the whole picture. So
Yep.
I was running into these detail issues. And so I was talking to one of my friends who's exceptionally good at art, and particularly really good with figures and dealing with this exact problem. And I was like, how do you deal with this? And he said, do you remember those little visual, they're called autostereograms. I only learned this recently.
Is it the 3D thing when you cross your eyes?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Back in the 90s, they had the little optical illusion thing where you stare at the picture, try to cross your eyes a little bit or see past the picture, and eventually this image forms.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what the hell does that have to do with drawing or with anything? And he was saying that, and I haven't read this, but he was saying that apparently they've used autostereograms to train athletes to back up and see the bigger picture and sort of visually zoom out or look past what you're seeing in order to get an idea of the whole
Mm-hmm.
visual image in front of you. And I'm like, I guess that's interesting, but I still don't understand what that has to do with me. So I start doing these little auto stereograms, just practicing them, and they're just kind of fun to do. They hurt your brain at first, but after a while you get pretty fast at doing them. So then I go to life drawing class, and as soon as I start feeling myself zoom into those little details, I just try to think of the auto stereogram, which sounds really fancy, but it's just a little picture. Right. And my brain you just kind of sit there and you try to see past what you're looking at and try to see the whole image of your drawing. And then you look at the model and you're not looking at any details and you're just seeing like the whole picture. And even though you might think, well, that's visual stuff, so that's drawing. They did this with athletes too, in order to see the whole playing field.
Mm-hmm.
It's like visual stuff is so tied to what you think mentally. And so with a drawing, if you are optically able to sort of zoom out and see everything at the same time, bypassing all details, then your brain kind of clicks back into that overall picture mode and it zooms you out. And so I've just kind of started, I am actively trying to train myself, and I feel like I'm making some headway with this, is that when I start feeling that detailed, too zoomed in feeling, there's a couple other things that I do to sort of tip me off that that's what I'm doing. I start leaning forward and I'll like get really close to the paper or to the screen. And so as soon as you start noticing that you're doing that, try to physically back up and, just for fun, try doing some auto stereograms and
I will definitely do that.
Yeah. And just think of the mental trickery that you kind of have to go through in order to see that image in the stereogram thing. You also have to do when you're mentally zooming out to see the bigger picture of whatever you're working on. I have not tried this with really anything else, but for drawing, both in the life drawing class and just on my own sketching and at work and everything, I just it takes half a second and you mentally zoom out and then you can kind of go back in. And that, for some reason, avoiding the details has kept my energy levels high and just continuing to work for the whole day. It's really weird. I don't necessarily know what the connection is between really small detail things and an overall picture, but there's something so refreshing and it rejuvenating that just kind of kicks your energy back into gear when you mentally zoom out. And with drawing, of course, it's visually too, but yeah, I don't know. Yes, I have noticed this problem. Yes, I deal with it. The cool thing is that artists have to work this into their workflow in order to overcome it. Otherwise, it ruins a picture. So yes, it's a problem that I know I deal with, but other people definitely deal with it too.
It's interesting. I haven't really thought of it in those terms, but I have heard quite a bit about how powerful or how much your brain follows your visual system. In that if you're trying to, like, I've read about actual experiments they've done with school kids and stuff where they do this experiment where they have, some subset of the kids, they make them stare at a certain point in space for, I don't know, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, whatever the time is. But they just make them stare, and that's it. They're just on this fixed point, and then they go do whatever they were going to do. And by doing that first, like just visually staring at something, they're able to get them to focus better on the subsequent task because they're sort of primed by
Right.
focusing on a particular point, which is interesting. I've also recently been listening a lot to just some talks on meditation and some of the way your brain works in these different states and everything. And one of the simple but interesting ideas there is how, your mind takes in a ton of stimulus all the time, different bits of information, and most of it is ignored. You have all kinds of sensations all over your body with your nerves. You're seeing all kinds of things and hearing stuff, and you can't process that all at once. So you have your attention, and I've heard it described as this sort of cone, like a light cone. We've talked about focus this way too, like a flashlight. So I think it's a good metaphor. But you can put your attention in certain places, and it's believed that you can probably do two different points of attention. You can kind of listen to one thing and look at another thing or something like that, but that's probably about it.
Right.
But regardless, you can have these, one or maybe two kind of, points of attention, and it can be pretty diffuse, where you're just staring out into a landscape and you're kind of seeing everything all at once, or it could be very focused, where you're really fixated on a singular point. And so you can, there's meditation, at least in part, is a practice of trying to, pay attention to all of this stuff, or focus on a particular thing, or keep your focus on this thing and not have it move somewhere else. And all that's really interesting. And I've started doing a little bit more meditation this week, hoping that it helps with some of this stuff. But I never really thought about it in the sense that it choosing to have a diffuse focus, which is what you're describing, literally this kind of funny exercise of staring at one of those cheesy 3D pictures. You're
Right.
forcing yourself into a diffuse visual focus as a way of trying to get your mind to follow, where it's more broad and not fixated on a singular point. And like with this experiment with the school kids, doing the opposite of forcing a particular point of focus, and that causes your mind to think that way. And I'm not having problems with that singular point of focus.
Right.
Other than that few minutes of a little bit of warm up, I'm there. I'm really able to do it. It's the opposite problem of too much of that. Like you were saying, you have to work around in art. But I guess I never really thought to try and use your senses, like actual vision or hearing or things like that,
Right.
in order to influence my mind, like to follow what's happening with my senses.
I didn't think about this until just now, but you know how I think we would all describe moonlight as relaxing, right?
Sure. Yeah.
You wouldn't consider, I mean, maybe dark or moody, but it's relaxing.
Mhm.
There's this thing. Okay, you have the rods and cones, and I guess there's a third one with a really fancy name that I don't really
Yeah.
understand, but
The
do you remember the name of it?
the intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells.
Perfect.
It's
Yeah.
it's
Okay,
in
so
my spaced repetition thing. That's the reason why.
I figured I was testing
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have your rods and your cones, and the other thing, but your rods see light and dark, right? And then your cones detect color. But cones also are responsible for your ability to zoom in on tiny little details. So if you look at something really close and you're looking at tiny little details, those are your cones that are able to that is picking that up. In moonlight, the light is so dim that your cones basically just shut off. That's why you don't see color in moonlight. It's just barely there at all. And that's because your cones are basically non-existent.
Yeah.
So you can no longer see detail. You can look really closely at a tree in the distance, or even in the foreground, and you can't pick out any details. And that's because your cones are shut off. I wonder if there is some connection between focusing really hard on details artistically, where you are zooming way in on tiny little details, or even just when you're working on, coding and you're right up against the screen looking at tiny little words and tiny little, I don't know, symbols that you use for coding stuff.
Yeah.
Uh,
Sure.
I wonder if there's a connection between cones and detailed visual stuff and sort of stressing that. Um, and I wonder if going into a dim setting, something like moonlight, would
Mhm.
help you visually and mentally kind of unwind and relax.
Yeah. That's a super interesting idea. Um, I think if you think about pretty much everything that we consider relaxing, it may not necessarily be dim light where it's, not letting you use your
Right.
cones versus the rods, right? But well, in the case of, let's say, stargazing, that is. In fact, you can see that really clearly if your eyes haven't adjusted that well
Yeah.
yet. If you look at a star, you can't see it, and if you look off axis, you can see it more in your periphery
Mm-hmm.
because you have the denser cones in the center of your eye. So that's kind of
Yeah.
an interesting thing.
It's your center field of vision or something. That pinpoint middle point of your eye are the cones, and they do not
Hmm.
work in low light, and that's why you can't look directly at something and see it.
Right,
But,
which sort of fits with that idea of focusing versus not. But even outside of that, if you think about what we consider relaxing, you'd say, flowing water, or, a forest full of trees, or even a
right.
fire or anything like that. But all of those things are something diffuse. It's if
You're
you're
right.
looking at a river, you're not looking at a singular point of something happening. You're seeing this large thing that fills your field of vision and all that. Same with a forest, there's trees everywhere. There's not some singular thing you're focused on. Same with, a campfire or something. You
Right.
you
Or
could focus
even,
on something, but that's not the idea.
yeah, going for a walk or a bike ride, you're
Right.
taking in the big picture. You're not focused on little. Yeah, that's interesting.
So maybe
So
I need to
go for a
just do
walk.
more of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Or be aware of, and I'll start paying attention to this, but yeah, I wonder if using the cones too much, that center field of vision,
Hmm.
if that sort of exhausts you in a way that
And
seeing a bigger picture wouldn't.
one kind of funny thing here too is that it's the problem has been a lot worse in recent months. If you rewind, say, 6 months ago, I
Right.
it's hard to remember exactly, but I don't think it was happening to the same degree at the very least. And that was probably because the weather was nice. And when the weather's nice, I tend to, during that little break, I'll go walk around. Just walk out the door, walk up and down the street. That was just kind of a habitual thing. But it's cold and it's rainy right now, so I haven't been doing that. So during the break, I'm still just kind of sitting there. And even if I'm not staring at my computer, I'm still just kind of staring,
Right.
waiting for the time to be up. So I wonder if that actually does have a major, or is a contributor to what I'm experiencing, just because I, without really thinking much about it, have not been walking around.
And if you relate it back to primitive humans, they were always outside. They
Yeah,
weren't sitting on their computer,
right.
staring at some tiny thing forever. They
Yeah,
were
it's probably
outside all the time.
yeah, it's probably worth considering that sitting somewhere staring at a tiny thing is probably not a very natural state, or at least not something we would do for a very long time in most cases.
Okay. Well, I think we have some things to work on for
Yeah,
that one.
that'll
You
that's
wanna?
great because I have some nice experiments that I can do and actual things to try. And let me just write that down real quick. Um, but no, that's cool. All right. So that was one of the first things I wanted to get into, was this sort of, focus, hyper focus, brain is cooked type of thing. And
Right.
that's a major thing that I want to improve. This is getting into something a little different, but we we both get this. And anybody who's listened to us for a little while is either on board with this, or well, they would have checked out. But we talked about the inner game of tennis. We talked about, the Batman effect and these different things, and they all kind of tell the same story, which is you really perform your best when you're not in your own head, when you're just doing the thing, when you aren't questioning your decisions, when you aren't being critical of yourself. That's when you do really well. And I think anybody observes that in themselves for the most part. So that's where I want to be. Whatever I'm doing, I want it to be like that, where I'm just that's just what is occupying my mind. I'm not judging, I'm not thinking or overthinking and that kind of stuff. 100%. But that's infinitely easier said than done, and that is just something that I've been struggling a lot with for probably all kinds of reasons. But when I'm doing something, I just have a tendency to make a lot of judgments almost out of my control. I've noticed this thing where, and it's like it seems so dumb, but I'll be typing an email, a message, whatever, and I'll mistype a word, as one does. And as I'm hitting backspace to go correct it, like I get this intense little spike of emotion. It's very negative, and it's far bigger than is justified for mistyping a word. And it's this feeling of, you messed up. Why did you do that? Are you dumb? Are you slowing down? Are you getting older? Can you not do it as well as you used to? Are you like, and it's not even conscious thought really. It's like these bundled up bad feelings that don't even need to have a whole lot of narrative. It's just like, boom, there's that feeling. And it just recalls all this like, blah. And it comes up a lot. Like almost any little mistake I make, there's like this very intense rejection of it, or just emotional response. And it's not great because it's something that is a small mistake that it becomes distracting and upsetting, and it pulls my mind out of what I was doing. So that's a problem.
Is there a, I have some thoughts on it, but is there a specific question there?
Yeah, what do
Why
I
does
do?
that happen? Or what do you do? Okay. All right. How this relates to me is I absolutely get the same thing. Like these overwhelming thoughts or feelings of just complete, uh, I don't know, failure
Yeah.
when I'm just doing a thing. But so, all right. So, one thing I feel like I have solved, not, okay, solved, I've gotten much better at in the last month and a half or so with this exact problem. I'm trying to think of how to describe it exactly. But, all right, let's say previously I would go to, practice drawing. I've always struggled so much with the human figure. I know that I'm supposed to be great at it because you can't be a great illustrator if you're not good at drawing humans, but I've just always struggled with it so much. But that hasn't stopped me from, you know, brute forcing my way through all kinds of instructional booklets. So I have learned all kinds of things about drawing them, very little about, or I've learned very little on how to actually do it. So I have all kinds of weird little facts in my head, but no real good experience. So I've struggled with this a lot. And previously it would go something like this. I would mark off, okay, I want it to be here. All right, now let's think of pose. Wait, you need to think about perspective. Wait, you're supposed to be thinking about anatomy. No, you need to be thinking about rendering. Wait, not yet. Nope. First, you got to think about composition.
Yeah.
No, you're supposed to just be thinking about placement on the page. Oh, damn it. You were supposed to do your proportions early on or whatever. And it's just this constant back and forth thing. Or I would get through half of it and then, I switched to thinking about perspective too much. And then I realize, oh, God damn it, I ruined the whole thing. And my pencil just gets harder and harder and deeper into the page. And until I'm so frustrated that I just want to stab the thing, which I have done many times before. I just freak out and it can become really frustrating. So the different approach that I've been taking is, okay, you start with what is natural to you. And this is kind of what I was talking about last week is instead of starting with, I'm just going to work really, really hard and frustrate myself until a good picture emerges. Doesn't happen. So instead, I'm going to start with what feels really great. Now, How this applies to typing and exactly, I don't know, but maybe we'll get there. So I realized that when I'm sitting down with my sketchbook, I really like drawing little C curves and S curves and straight lines. I mean, literally that simple. I can make a fun little C curve or an S curve or a straight line over and over and over again. And it's fun. You just kind of do this little thing. It's fun. You feel like a child, whatever. It's fun. Okay. So, how do I draw, let's say, a portrait of a boy's head or something? Okay. How do I draw that? Well, previously I would maybe try to start with the skull because I've learned that before. Oh, I'm supposed to be thinking of anatomy. Damn it. I meant to focus on perspective. Crap, I screwed up the proportions again. This is stupid. Whatever. I hate this. That's how I would do it previously. Now it's okay, well, how do I draw a portrait of this boy? Well, I like to do C curves and S curves. So I can start with a C curve. I'm still enjoying it of the front of the face. So like right down here. And I can add a C curve to the top of the head and then to the back of the head. And then I add the jawline. And then I cut in with the bridge of the nose, all still C curves. And then you add the ear, which is basically just a combination of C curves. And then you add the nose and you add the little eye socket with this like sort of bent C curve, and everything lines up with C curve, S curve, or some sort of combination off of that. All of a sudden, I have an entire head that is built completely out of things that I enjoy. And it was literally as simple as just making a C curve. Now, once I have that all mapped out, it's so easy to just jump right into thinking about form. And then you start adding form, little accent shadows or cast shadows, whatever. You can easily think about perspective once you have that framework down. And you go from one thing to the next, and it's just, I mean, in theory, it's just pure enjoyment. And as soon as you hit a point of frustration, you can feel it. You start, the pencil gets a little bit harder, the lines get darker. You start feeling that frustration. You stop and you back up. And you go, okay, where did I go wrong? Well, I stopped thinking about the C curves and the S curves and the stuff that I enjoyed. And I instead started to think about form too soon. Or I started to think about composition when I wasn't supposed to be thinking about composition. I wasn't supposed to be thinking about this next stage yet. I should have stuck with, whatever stage I was in. So I jumped a step. Okay, that's fine. Just back up, find your place again, and then take the correct step. It leads into the next thing. And it's been like therapy. I mean, really, I've had these little traumatic moments in my artistic learning experience that I've just never been able to get through. And I always thought it was just brute force. You need to learn more. You need to learn more stuff, memorize more facts, whatever. And actually, the answer lied in something that I did, when I was a child, which is just draw little curves or whatever. That was the answer. So I've sort of been going through these little traumatic moments and healing them with this thought of it's not a matter of, seeing some skill that you want to get to and then suffering your way to that. It's about growing this thing that you already know how to do.
Right.
I'll try to make it apply to typing. But if you think about it on a big, like massive scale, you only ever do things that you understand. Your brain only ever makes connections. There is no real new information in your brain. Your brain is just your brain. All it does when you learn new information, when you gain a skill, whatever, there's nothing new added. Maybe in the future we'll get there with some microchips or whatever. But right now, it's just your brain. And yeah, it might add some neurons, right? It might grow some, I guess it can adapt or whatever, but really, it's just your brain. No one's shoving things into your skull. All your brain is doing is making connections between this thing that you already know and something else that you already know. And when they meet up, it makes something new. But that's it. That's all that's happening. And so when you're learning something, like me learning art or whatever, I'm taking something that I truly already know how to do. I can make a C curve and an S curve. And then I'm just putting one on top of the other and then bending it a little bit or squishing it or extending it or doing a combination. That's all it is. And as long as I just stay on that path, it's pure enjoyment and it's pure second nature. It's all natural to me. And I never leave that. And so when you find the frustration, you know that you're trying to make a jump between something you know and something that's not there. And it won't work until you sort of build that bridge between one thing and the next. You have to connect things you know. Um, so with, let's say, typing, I still don't totally know how this applies, but if you're typing and then you hit something wrong, I what was happening for me is that I was jumping a step. I was going to something and thinking about things in a way that I shouldn't have been doing at the time. And for you, hitting a wrong thing, you see it as wrong. If I screw up a drawing, I see it as wrong. Do you see any
Well,
connection?
no, no,
I,
I do. I mean, the typing was an example. I wasn't trying to come up with a solution to me making typing mistakes. It's more just representative of what often happens, which is, and this happens in everything that I do to some degree, which is I'll mess something up and then there's just this intense like feeling of, oh, was this, there's a lot of judgment that comes from what really is a pretty simple mistake. That's kind of what I was getting at.
so what I've realized, and this is written about, is that your second nature, your, as Inner Game of Timness calls it, your self two, this other side of you that you is just sort of, I don't know, your second nature. When you're in that state, your flow state or whatever, you're just kind of in the zone. You do not care about time, and you do not care about the subjective idea of things being good or bad. That only belongs to your self one, to your conscious mind. So if you're having thoughts, which I do all the time, but not so much recently, if you're having thoughts of, is this, or you make a mistake and you think, God, I suck. I hate everything. It's all ruined. I'll never be a great typist, or I'm getting old, or whatever. That is a huge red flag that you are now in self one again.
Yeah.
You have gone back to your conscious mind. Because if you were in your self two, you wouldn't care. That's not a thing. You don't make mistakes in self two. You're just playing around. There are no real mistakes unless it's, or whatever. So
Yeah.
when something like that happens, it's not a matter of, God damn it, you should have gotten it right. It's a, no, I need to approach this differently. I need to find a way to stay in my, second nature. I need to find a way to stay in myself too. And find a connection. Find some way to relate that mistake to something you enjoy. Because I think, because I have a lot to say on this stuff, I think that is the secret. Finding things you enjoy. So you need to somehow relate, say with typing, making that mistake, you need to find a way to see that relates to something you actually enjoy. Just like taxes.
Right.
You don't care about them until you find some way, some angle that relates to something you enjoy.
Yeah. So here's a couple thoughts on that. First off, I think the way you put that there is spot on, which is when that happens, that is clearly a self one problem. It's a very conscious thinking mind that's making judgments and reacting to something. And in a sense, it's almost like I don't really have an anchor emotionally. Like you're describing, doing this drawing where
Right, right.
you're just doing what you feel good about and like and enjoy, and so you just sit there and it's just kind of a pleasure to do this, and you're taking that and sort of playing with it and expanding it and trying to draw, a portrait or something, right? But there's a comfort there. You feel good. It's almost by definition you aren't being super critical and angry and everything in that space. So if I'm doing something that feels really good and I feel confident, let's say lifting, right? I've been into powerlifting for a long time, and if I go to lift, most of the time I just feel pretty good about it. Like there's not a whole lot of judgment there. Something I'm confident with. I just feel good doing that. But I get into other areas, areas that are a bit, more unknown. I don't really have that emotional anchor or that thing that just feels really good to me. And then it's kind of like you're treading water out somewhere in the deep ocean. Like, what's here? I'm not really sure how I feel about myself, and that kind of thing. Like this, I'm working on this project, and Well, I said I have this kind of golden zone, right? Where, after that initial warm up period, I get to where I'm just focused and I feel really good. And that it doesn't happen during that window. When I'm really focused in a
Right.
way that feels really good to me, I it's not that I don't care. It's like it's not even in my mind anymore. I'm just doing what I'm doing. I'm just solving problems and figuring things out and designing things and think like there's not really any room for anything else. I'm just doing it. But after that, I kind of go through this cycle of the hyper focus and then the getting fried and whatever, and I'm doing other stuff, and I get into that mode of like, okay, what's going on with me? And I start to get really critical, and that self one really comes out. So part of this, I think, is that I think the answer to the first question probably partially answers the second one here, which is I'm getting so exhausted, kind of get I can't sustain that good zone of thinking because of the hyper focus. And so I
Right.
wind up just out of that, and then I'm kind of back into thinking a lot and all that sort of stuff.
Right. So, okay, two thoughts. One is I think you sort of dismissed okay, so I'm drawing, it's this comfort thing. It's a little bit different than what you're doing. Right. I don't think it's actually different at all. And the reason is because I also do other things and I notice the same pattern of behavior, same
Yeah.
pattern of thought reach into all other things that I do. If okay, so I think it actually if you think of a walk, just think of a nice walk. How could that possibly relate to drawing? Well, it's a brain function, something that you do, second nature. You're able to walk, you know, see your surroundings, observe things, whatever. But you are just pure second nature walking through, hopefully, nature, you know? You're just on a walk and your brain is enjoying it for many different reasons. But one reason is that it's going through this motion. It is serving a function. Your brain likes to do that and it kind of has to do that. So it's sort of set this pace, this peaceful pace for your brain, just like my drawing or whatever, if it's going right. So you're on this walk. And let's say you're in a really good mood. Maybe you're with a friend or whatever, and you're walking, having a good time. And then you trip, okay, on a brick that's out of place or whatever.
Yeah.
And you trip and they go, "Ha, that's funny." And then you just laugh or whatever, and then you keep walking. All right? No big deal. It stopped the brain function, right? There was a wrench thrown in the way and something was thrown off. But your brain recovered, you got right back into it because you had an attitude of, oh, okay, whatever, it's funny, let's just continue. Now, picture yourself walking by yourself, and you're on a walk because you're just pissed off at somebody, okay? And you're
Yeah.
alone, and you're walking through a neighborhood, and there's all these houses everywhere, and you're just kind of in your thoughts, whatever. You trip on the same brick, and you're like, God damn it, stupid brick, whatever. And then you start looking around in the windows. You're like, God, stop looking at me. Don't look at me. And you just feel like everyone's watching you, and you just hate everything, and you
Yeah.
just want to get out of that situation as fast as possible. So I think what you want to do is develop an attitude or a response to when something like that happens. You do not respond in a way of, oh, stop looking at me. Why is people are probably looking at me, or this is stupid, the brick should have been put in place, or whatever. You want to develop a response. And when something like that happens, you go, I just tripped. I'm going to not do that next time. Maybe smile
Yeah.
at yourself or laugh about it, whatever. And then you just keep going. So I've been trying to do that with drawing because, even though it's going great, I'm still running into plenty of issues. So, I'll start drawing, everything's going well. And then before I know it, I'm down one of the frustration paths, or I've hit a brick or whatever. Something
Hmm.
goes wrong. And instead of, I don't know, erasing it all out and trying to redraw it or erase that part out or just, I don't know, messing with it too much. Lately, I put a little X by it and then I do it again. I just redraw the whole thing or redraw that part or try to solve that part. And what that has done, it's just like your, what do you call it? Mental noting, or
Hmm.
you just take a mental note. Oh, that went wrong. Let's try it again. Let's see if we can solve this. I went through like 6 different versions of this one. Okay, actually, this is kind of important. I was trying to draw this angry kid, right? Just happened to be this little angry kid, and I wanted him, with his head down and his arms crossed, and he was just angry. So I tried to draw it, and I'm like, okay, if his head was down, he would be at this, his his eye line would be at this area, and then like in perspective, blah blah blah, and then I'm trying to think of the bones of the arm or whatever, and then I look at it and like, okay, this just sucks. So I put an X by it and I try it again. Same thing. I'm thinking about, okay, humerus. Wait, no, wait, deltoid. Wait, no, he's supposed to have an expression. God damn it! What do eyebrows look like? Why can't I remember anything about the years I've spent learning art? So I put another X and I tried again. And then I'm like, no, no, no. Let's start. Let's go back to the C curves. All right. C curve, top of the head. Okay, next one. Is it still feeling good? Yes, continue. So then you just start adding things. And if you feel a little frustration, you slow down and you back up and and then before I know it, there we go. All of a sudden, my memory is unlocked. And I'm not thinking about any sort of fact or skill or whatever. I don't care about that anymore. It's just all of a sudden, my memory is unlocked and I'm swimming through these. I'm thinking of people when I've seen them angry, and I'm thinking about how arms look when they're crossed, and I'm just, all of a sudden it all comes to me, and there it is, you know? So I tripped on the brick like 6 times, but then I found a way to keep walking. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to develop habits, and I've had some success with this of just doing exactly what you said, is taking a little mental note. I don't cross off the drawing like I used to. I don't erase the whole thing. I don't whatever. I just put a little X by it, and it's more of just a note of, this went wrong. I'm gonna figure out why later, and it might be months later when I flip back through my sketchbook, but I'm not gonna worry about it anymore right now. I'm just gonna try again, or I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna keep walking. I'm gonna laugh it off. Let's just keep going, and it's begun to really train my response to these mistakes as not necessarily, I mean, they are mistakes because they look god awful and whatever.
Right.
But it's, oh, that's kind of interesting. Let's just set that aside and keep going. Let's not dwell on it. Let's not develop a response of anger and hatred and, self pity or whatever. Let's just take note and move on to the next thing. And before you know it, if you keep feeding that second nature with what feels good, constantly asking yourself, what feels good? What do I actually like? Your second nature begins to take over. It's really weird.
Hmm.
You have to wonder, why do we like things? What is it? What part of our brain is liking something? Well, it's the silent second nature self 2 part of your brain. And there's a reason why it likes something. It's because it understands it and it makes connections to it that benefit you. So that answer of, what do I like? The answer is actually the right answer, because that's the thing that your brain connects to. It's really weird. I never really thought about it that way,
Hmm.
but it makes a lot of sense. Every time that I've had a success with drawing, it's because I have done what felt good, not because I've done what's been the hardest or, whatever. It's actually me relying the most on my second nature, the part I don't understand, but the thing I enjoy the most. It's really weird. But the answer, I think, is literally just do what you enjoy or find a way to connect it to something you enjoy. So if you type the word wrong, find a way, find a world in which you enjoy that thing. And this makes perfect sense with when you watch people who are really good at what they do and they're performing or whatever, they don't they don't do that. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe there's instances of that happening, but they seem to stick to, for the most part, things that are second nature to them, and they leave off everything else. That doesn't mean they don't push themselves, but they do what they enjoy, like what's thoroughly good for them. They just stick to that and they just kind of flow with that. They just ride that wave of enjoyment. And that's what they are absolutely best at.
So one of the personality traits that I definitely have is kind of the perfectionist type of thinking, right? I have a bit of an obsessive nature. I can get obsessed with things. But the perfectionism type thing, the way it usually presents is, and we've talked about this at length, but there's a lot of self-image involved, and I want people to think that I'm really good, sort of this exceptionalism type of
Right.
thing. But a big component of it is, if I'm doing anything and there's something wrong about it, is there some mistake or something that I just see and I know that is wrong, it's very hard for me to let that go. Like I really want to fix that. Not to the detriment of myself and the project sometimes. Like sometimes, the like you said, you're obsessed with the arm, you're not realizing it's half the size that it's supposed to be. You kind of miss the big picture for these little
Right.
details that you can get really sucked into sometimes. But that's part of my nature, and I think there are maybe some advantages, but definitely some downsides.
Well,
So
not to, I don't know. I think it's a response that you've built up and that you've held on to for a long time, but I think it can be retrained.
or
I don't
okay, right.
saying it's part of your nature is putting it in a permanent place that I don't think is permanent.
I agree.
Um,
I probably shouldn't use that word that way. What I mean is that it's part of who I am right now. Like it's part of my current state. Is that I have a tendency to do that. Or I've had a tendency to do that for a long time. So, right. I'm not saying it can't be changed. In fact, I don't think we would be having this conversation if I didn't think that some of these things could be changed, because otherwise what are we talking about, right? So, whatever. That's a thing with me. I get obsessed. And sometimes it can, there might be some problem. I set up a new PC and the Wi-Fi isn't working, and I don't know why. And I'm trying to figure it out. And it's late. It's 10 o'clock or something. I've been at it for an hour, maybe 2 hours, can't figure it out. And what I usually do is I figure it out, even if that takes 7 hours. Like, even if the sun's coming up, I'm just not, I'm, recompiling drivers. I'm doing all kinds of whatever. I'm figuring that problem out. And I mean, sometimes it can it's not even well, I'm just gritty and determined. I'm just obsessed. I just get obsessed with that thing. I want it to be right, and so I just cannot get away from it. Even if I try to go to bed, it's like all I'm thinking about, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna might as well keep working on it because I can't do anything else. So that's something that I definitely fall into a lot, and I've been trying to moderate that quite a bit because it is very, very easy to wind up getting obsessed with something and kind of just blow up my entire day and sleep schedule and everything, and then realize later that it wasn't even really that important. Like, oh, I was gonna hardwire it into the router anyway, so this I'm not even gonna use it. It's pointless. So I have that obsessive nature, and the reason I talk about that in response to what you're saying is that even though there are times when I think that can be really useful, like obsession can be a bit of a superpower in that you could just really grind away at something, but it also causes me to be sort of hypersensitive sometimes to errors or mistakes or just something that I perceive as a flaw. And it causes this pretty strong emotional reaction to it. And it's really opposite of what you're saying, where something happens and I've developed this intense negative emotions around something negative. And it feels like it's kind of gotten to the point, or maybe I'm just paying more attention to it now, but it's disruptive to me where I know that I want to be in this state where I'm just, you said, you trip on the brick and you laugh about it, not freak out and really, like, you've seen this, people do this. Just to use your example as like a literal thing, some people will trip and they'll laugh, and no one judges them for tripping. No one's like, wow, you're a pretty crappy human, you must be bad at walking, you trip. Like, they laugh about it. Sometimes somebody will trip and they like get all red faced and upset and like, what are you looking at and whatever, and then you judge them. You're like, oh, this person kind of sucks, they're a little bit obnoxious and they can't laugh at themselves. Like, you judge them for their response to it, not for the thing actually happening. Or put differently, the problem is your reaction, not the actual tripping on the brick. And for
right.
me, I think that is something that is a problem for me, is that it doesn't matter that I mistyped a word. What matters is that I got upset about it. I'm not like yelling in public or anything, but it is this little mental reaction to it. And I think it's been reinforcing this negative thing. And that negativity really pulls me out of whatever I'm doing, where I want to just keep walking and having a good time with friends or just on my peaceful journey. But instead, I've got this like negative narrative in my head now, and it totally pulls me out of that.
Yes. Also me all the time, always. Like
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a major issue that I've had. But there's, okay, getting up, this is almost, it might be too vague, I think, but getting obsessed with problems has been both, wonderful and terrible for me, because
Hmm.
there's plenty of other artists that I've seen that don't really care if they're any good or not. They're
Right.
happy to make plenty of mistakes and keep getting their ellipses wrong or their perspective wrong or whatever. And they're fine with that. They just kind of find a way around it. And I don't want to make tons of mistakes. So I've also gotten obsessed with, okay, I don't want my figures to suck. So I'll study all kinds of different books. And it makes me even more upset that I've struggled with it for so long, because I've put so much work into it and it just hasn't stuck, and I haven't gotten anywhere. So yeah, I've also gotten obsessed with issues. And it's a good thing that you search
Right.
for an answer. It's probably the best type of person might be the person that trips on the brick and then they go and fix it because they don't want anyone else to trip on it, right? I
Yeah.
mean, they want to fix the problem. But the problem becomes when you notice it actually damaging other things, or you realize that the problem that you're obsessing about is actually not a big deal at all. That
Right.
then it becomes a big problem. And I I just closed something. Um, I think it's kind of the same thing. I mean, you want to change your response
Yeah.
to, and
Or it
do you
does.
have any other examples of it?
I mean, it's just, it's all the time. It's anything. If I'm, any mistake that I make, it can just often trigger negative emotions. It's like too trivial to even give examples for because it's anything.
Okay. Well, I think part of the reason why things seem to be going so well for me right now is because it's literally a technical thing. Like, I seem to have bypassed most of the frustration. All of the things, not all, but a lot of the things that would cause me to feel that way, to have that intense negative emotion about myself and my work, whatever. I seem to have kind of developed a system of getting through that.
Hmm.
And then once I get to this platform, I'm sort of above, at least for the last month and a half or so, I'm sort of above that area where most of that happens.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there are things you can do, I don't know, either to see it differently or to literally just keep you from doing them again if they're repeat
Yeah. I
things. I don't know. I'm sure it's different in each situation, but
No, no, I don't think it's much different than what you're describing. I think it's a pretty fundamental thing. As you said, there's it's a reaction to something happening, and in the right mental state it doesn't really seem to be a problem, and in the wrong one it is. Or there's this habituated thing of every time this happens it upsets me and I hate it and I don't want it to happen anymore, but it does because it's just a thing that happens. Like, I don't want to make mistakes, but I do, and that's just the deal. So trying to learn or rehabituate yourself to it where this thing happens and I don't interpret it that way anymore, or I practice not interpreting it that way. Like you said, you make a mistake, but you're trying to practice not reacting to it in a negative way anymore. I think I
there
just
are,
need to practice that.
well, there are other situations, not just me literally doing a drawing where I run into an issue and then I have a negative reaction. There's scheduling stuff. Let's say I planned to read a book, but then something comes up. I have to go somewhere that I didn't want to go. It was out of the schedule. I did not want to do this. It throws off all my plans, whatever. That makes me very upset and very angry. And in the past,
Yeah.
I have had some times where when you pull me out of my schedule that I worked really hard on, it
Yeah.
it really makes me upset. I'm not happy about it. And so in the past it's almost just disabling. I can't I My brain just shuts off and I'm just so dead inside. And I feel like everything has just come crumbling down because I have to go somewhere, for a couple
Yeah.
hours. I mean, it's not a big deal, but in my head, it's everything that, I've built it
Yeah.
all on this. And so I will be crushed. But what I've learned to do through these talks and just thinking about it differently is I just switch modes. I'm not saying it's easy, but it has become much, much easier. When something unexpected comes up, I switch modes from, okay, I'm not working on this part of my schedule. Now I switch to observation in the real world, you know.
Yeah.
So I grab my little notebook and I head out into the world and I find all kinds of ideas that I jot down, and it becomes a different activity that I also enjoy. So that's helped me tremendously, is sort of categorizing it as, okay, this happened. Now I can switch modes to something else, which I recognize and enjoy, and then I'm in that mind state and I'm fine. It wasn't necessarily me retraining myself to, if something changes or something bad happens, I go, I will be positive. I will see, the bright side, think happy thoughts. It wasn't me doing that. It was me kind of coming up with a plan in place for when something like that happened. And so, and now I'm kind of developing them for, specifics, like on a drawing. If I run into a big issue that could cause me to, second guess my livelihood and wonder what the hell I'm doing with my life, well, instead of indulging in that, I just kind of put an X, and now it's sort of my, I don't know, it's like what I do now. It's a new reaction, and
Hmm.
I switch into a different category, or my brain recognizes it as, okay, this is that thing happening. You know how to respond to it. You have a plan in place for when that happens. It's an exit strategy. I know how to get out of this thing. So, it doesn't cover everything, but when you run into a big problem that you're obsessing about or whatever, maybe you should have an exit strategy in place, some kind of plan for when you feel that way, you go do that other thing. And it might be really weird. It might be like, I don't know, go eat a tub of ice cream or watch a funny movie or yeah, I don't know, whatever it is,
Yeah.
or it could be, I don't know what the hell it could be, but something that
Right.
totally takes you off and forces you to see the big picture. I don't know, some kind of plan in place to where you start recognizing that problem happening, you know what to switch to, not necessarily just like, oh, I need to retrain my attitude, because that to me is just, that's much more difficult.
Yeah. Well, I'm still doing keto, so the tub of ice cream is not going to work.
They make
But
keto ice cream, but you,
I,
you know what I mean.
yeah, it's not great. I've tried it. Um, Makes you feel weird.
I've also
Anyway,
tried it. It's disgusting,
yeah,
but yeah.
yeah. Um, ugh, there's a lot there, and we should probably not go too far into this because I don't want to I want to lose some of what we've gone over because I actually really like some of these specific things to work on. Um, I it makes me I haven't thought of things in this term in these terms. It almost sounds a little bit obvious laying it out. Like, okay, yeah, this is the right thing to do. But when it's in your head, it's in your head. It's just you
Yeah.
don't think of it this way. But I think somebody even shared this with us, but I was watching some video and I've heard other stories like this. But like in the field of psychology, things kind of used to be at this point where if you went to see, a therapist or somebody, they would the strategy was, let's figure out what the root of your problem is. Are you secretly in love with the same type of person that your parents are? Like, I mean, Freud and his whole whatever around that whole deal, right? But that was the approach, which was, you've got problems, let's solve the puzzle, let's figure out the root cause. And that's pretty logical, right? And that was the approach for a long time. But in more recent years, with other types of therapy, like cognitive behavioral therapy and things like that, the focus really isn't on that anymore. It's not so much, let's solve the puzzle, it's let's solve the problem by trying to come up with actual ways of dealing with it, like retraining yourself. Exactly what you're saying. You have something happen, you try and kind of reteach yourself to react a certain way to it versus this other, unproductive way of reacting to it that you were doing before, often without even really thinking. But like that's the approach of the more modern therapies for the most part. Like who cares what the root cause is? We're probably putting way too simple of a narrative around it anyway. People are extremely complex. Like why even worry about that? Let's just deal with the actual result. So again, I haven't thought of this in these terms, but I think it makes a lot of sense, which is, I have this reaction, this strong reaction to, me making an error. And my thought is, well, why? What's going on? There must be something here. And maybe there is, maybe there's not. But it probably doesn't matter. What I really need to do is really just focus on trying to retrain that reaction where I make this error. Let's try and spin that in a direction that's not disruptive to me. And
Right.
the funny thing, like I think you're saying or experiencing, is that you put yourself in this different environment and it's like you just start to adapt to it, where it just becomes the new you in a way. Like you don't react really badly to errors because you've been practicing not doing that, and now you're the type of person who doesn't. And so that's just kind of the new state of operating, and I've experienced that for other things. So I'm pretty excited to think about this on those terms, and I'll try to go do something, and I'll run into some of these problems where I'm really getting in my own head. I'm doing a lot of that kind of judgment and reacting really strongly to things, thinking a lot about the future and is this going to work? Am I good at this? That all that stuff. And my thought or gut reaction is always to feel guilty and feel like I'm just bad at doing stuff and just kind of get into that typical loop. And it's funny because, again, we've talked about this a lot and how that's just never really the right reaction, but I just do it because I'm just not thinking about it that consciously. But I wind up in this guilt cycle where, oh, I suck. I'm bad at this. I don't know why I can't do this better for longer. And, why do I get angry? And I'm angry at myself for getting angry, and this whole ridiculous loop.
Right.
I never really thought about it in the sense of, well, rather than just feel like I'm inadequate or be frustrated, let's just try and take this approach of fixing these issues or working on these issues and practicing getting into this right mental space and just making that the thing I'm after. I don't know if that made sense, but
Yeah.
okay.
I think the well, for one, there is no hack. There's no like one hack that will just immediately put you into the perfect mind state. Trust me, I've been trying to find the perfect hack, but there isn't
Yeah.
one. But I think the best way, or the way that's really been working with me, and it's not 100% success rate, but it seems to be the best way that I can go from that frustrated feeling of, oh, I'm not good enough. I wish I was good enough. Why do I suck so bad? Why can't I remember how to
Mm-hmm.
do this? Whatever. That frustrated state of mind, the thing that's been working from getting me from that to the second nature, natural feeling, things are just going good, and I no longer care about whether I'm doing good or not, although magically I am, is that was a big run on sentence, uh, is simply asking yourself, what is, where do I feel good? So instead of wondering, oh, I wish I was this good, I wish I had these 2,000 skills. If I only had those, I could be happy and I would be great. It's what is the one? What's the one thing that I can do naturally that I can enjoy? Let's start with that and see if we can add one more. Okay? If we can add one more, let's try to add a third. Okay? And by the time you get to that level, you're already in it and you no longer care, and your
Mm-hmm.
second nature's just kind of taken off in doing the thing that it does. And that's pretty much it. You find the thing that works that you can do 100% naturally, you build on it just a little bit, and then all of a sudden you're off to the races, and the rest is history, and you don't care. So anytime you find yourself super frustrated and having those thoughts that I often get myself, for me recently, it's literally been as simple as, okay, let's draw some C curves and S curves. And for some
Mhm.
weird reason, it opens the door into what I can naturally do. All of a sudden, a flood of memories and skills and natural weird things just come right back to me. And I'm right where I need to be. And that's that. I'm not saying I'm like incredible, but I've been able to bypass some of my biggest struggles. And so now I feel like I'm finally at a level where I can build. Like I can start building from here. I can see how I can go forward rather than I don't know, all these weird fragments of frustration
Mhm.
and stuff tried to, like glued and taped duct taped together. It's like now I actually have this little foundation and it is the thing that feels natural to me and it's just going on top of that and that's it. Like there's still, plenty of stuff to learn, but it feels good. It feels like me. That's why all these conversations about how important it is to organize things and ask yourself, does it spark joy? Is this me? Does it feel good? All those
Yeah.
questions, they might seem really simple, but it it's like your subconscious or your second self or your second nature, whatever. It's like a person that can't talk at all. And so you hold something in front of them and you go, "Do you like this?" And they just kind of like shake their head and you're like, "Oh, okay." So you grab something else, like, "Do you like this?" And they kind of nod their head and you're like, "Oh, okay. Hold on to that." And then you just keep going. And they don't speak. They can't speak because that side of your brain doesn't have verbal communication. It doesn't
Mhm.
exist. It's all feelings. That's it. So you as the conscious self one are just this person trying to serve this self two, just showing it things. Is this you? Yes, no? Oh, okay. Let's try something else. And you know it when it's right. And it's very difficult to know what's right or wrong or to develop some sort of perfect plan for it to always work, but it's weird because that self two, the one that's reacting to things, those emotions are so deep and intertwined and go back to the day you were born or before
Mhm.
then. It's so deeply ingrained in your head to untangle those, like psychotherapy or whatever. It would take 100 years to untangle what's actually going on. But your brain can say yes or no. It can say, yes, that sparks joy, like immediately. It can
Mhm.
know that. And it's weird. You don't know how you know it, but you just know it. And so that's what I've been trying to do is when I start drawing, it's, does this feel good? No, no. Okay, let's try something else. Does this feel good? Yeah. Okay, let's continue down that road. And sure enough, the answer of the thing that feels good just so happens to also be the correct answer.
Okay. That
It
I
it it also sounds really simple. Well, maybe not that simple, but it seems very simple in theory, and I think it actually is simple in theory. However, finding that
yeah.
thing that works for the self too, that is difficult and will always be a thing that you have to work on forever. But yeah, I
Yeah.
that's what I've been doing.
No,
It's really been working.
I'm very on board with what you're saying, and I for me right now the thinking is okay. I need to figure out what is the equivalent of drawing the C curves and S curves. Like what
Yeah.
does that feel like for me, and how does that fit into the different things that I'm applying myself to and all that stuff. But I I get it, and I think you're right, and I've experienced that at times before, and I'm gonna work on that. That is gonna be my that's just going to be what I work on coming out of here. I think okay, we have very little time because your computer hard shuts off in 5 minutes.
We got 5 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just kind of trying to absorb some of these ideas and like synthesize them a little bit. So let's maybe sum up. Right? Is there any other major points you want to drop in the next very short window of
No.
time? Okay.
If I try to drop another point, I'll just run it into the ground or something. I don't know.
Okay. All right. All right. So let me just tell you, and you can respond a little bit too. But here's what I'm going to try and do in response to this conversation we just had. So, number one, I'm having trouble getting into hyper focus, fixated on little details. It exhausts me, and I can't sustain doing good work in the right headspace for very long. So, the focus for that isn't going to be feeling bad and guilty and thinking I'm bad at focus. I'm going to do very simple things like walk around a lot, or uh, look at the stereogram things from the 90s and make my
Auto
eyes have to defocus.
stereogram.
Audio stereogram, yeah. I'm just going to do physical things that are simple, that don't involve me trying to control my thoughts or anything. It's just do something that tries to put my mind in that state. And we'll see what happens there. But hopefully that helps with that problem. I think it will. The other one is the strong reaction to an error. That is something I want to just practice. I'm not going to treat it like a big failure of mine or whatever. I just want to start practicing every time that happens, diverting my reaction to somewhere else where it's something I laugh about, or it triggers me going to do something that I enjoy, or whatever that happens to be.
My comment on that would be, like we have said in the past, identify it as a thing and call it something.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you slip into a different skill. You're no longer viewing it through the filter of whatever thing that you're doing right then.
Mm-hmm.
You've jumped out of that into something else. You've jumped into a different category. This is a different game. All right. Figure out how to solve that thing. That's another skill or game or category that you also enjoy. In theory, you will find a way to enjoy that. So name it, identify it,
Yeah.
recognize it, and then find a protocol to use when you actually run into it.
Right. Okay. So that's the second major thing to work on. And then probably I guess the last kind of major theme here is to find the happy place, I guess. Find that.
Okay. Yes, but we only got 2 minutes. People seem to be confusing. Every time I say, do what feels good, whatever, people are like, well, you're supposed to work hard. You're supposed to go outside your comfort zone. Yeah. I know that. I enjoy running, even though running is hard, okay? Like,
Right.
It's a hard thing to do, but it still feels right. So when you are in that spot that your brain recognizes and feels good about, and it sparks joy or whatever, push yourself. Go put yourself really, really hard, but don't get off of that track of recognizable happy
Right.
place.
Yeah. No, I get it. Maybe happy place isn't the right word, but the place that feels right. I'll just leave it at that.
Your second nature. Yeah. Okay, 1 minute.
Okay, that's it. That's what I'm gonna do. Those are the three things that I want to focus on. It'll probably be more than a week. I'll be focusing on this for a month, but that's the plan.
I think that's good.
Okay, cool.